Hello, thank you for coming to the Skeptic Track. I'm going to be turning this over to Kurt Anderson in a moment. We do have a couple of panelists that are up. I see one of them now. Yep, there's one. Okay, so we still are missing one, but Kurt is going to figure out how to do without. So thank you so much for joining us. Kurt Anderson?
All right, good afternoon. How is everybody? Excellent. I'm doing my first ever cosplay. I figured since John Cleese was here, I would do my brother Maynard. So, right. I have a holy hand grenade in case the rabbit gets out of hand. So we have that. But that's got nothing to do with academia, so we're going to move on. Let's let the panelists that we have here already introduce themselves and kind of give us a little bit background on your academic credentials or career. I know that you've done work outside of academia as well, but all of you are highly qualified to talk about academia. So let's do that as kind of the premise for our panel today. So we'll start down here with Nick.
Hi, Nick Eftimades. I spent a career in the U.S. government, actually in the intelligence community. For some of that time, a fair amount of that time, I was an analyst, and as an analyst trained in what you would call critical thinking, or at least in those skill sets. And then subsequent to retiring in 2017, became a professor at Penn State University, where I now work with my students on that skill set.
Excellent.
I'm Cady Coleman. I am a former astronaut. Always an astronaut. Well, you know, the deal is, and since everybody here I think is into details, is that it's important to not have people think that I speak for the agency since I am retired. You know, when I say, oh, I can't believe they did that. So actually, if you look at any astronaut that is, got anything for sale or any of those kinds of things or is speaking their opinion, you don't see that NASA meatball on their suit there. Anyways, so I did work for NASA from 92 to 2000 and the end of 16. Before that, I was a polymer chemist, polymer scientist, so I have a degree in chemistry undergrad from MIT, and then a PhD from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, which is in this corner of Massachusetts, but it's where so much of how to understand polymers and study them actually grew up, and it's still considered, I think, one of the best places in the world. And then I did research in the Air Force. I was at the Air Force Paid for School, did research in the Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, new materials for airplanes and other kinds of things. And since I lead a charmed life, I applied for the astronaut program at just the time that they wanted material scientists to do experiments up on that space station. And so I got selected by NASA in 1992 and loaned there by the Air Force until I left, which was pretty great. And since I've been retired, I worked at Arizona State University as an adjunct professor or professor of the practice. Their name for me was their global explorer in residence who lives somewhere in the galaxy.
All right. Forrest?
Yeah, hi. I'm the least cool person on this panel. My name is Forrest Valkail. I'm a biologist. I hold a handful of degrees in my area of study. I have undergraduate degrees in science education, general biology, liberal arts and biology, and then integrated biology with an organismic and evolutionary bioconcentration. From there, I got a master's in biological anthropology with research in paleoecological reconstruction through stable isotope analysis, rebuilding ancient ecosystems to learn more about human evolution. And right now, I'm finishing a second master's in biomedical sciences with a focus on human anatomy and vertebrate paleontology because I'm very dumb and I can't be stopped. I use all of this to teach science to strangers on the internet. You can find me at TikTok and YouTube rambling about creationism and getting people generally excited about the reality that they weren't sure they wanted to be a part of in the first place.
I am working on my PhD, and I don't even know what he said. So maybe I shouldn't be here.
I was kind of like, really? Could you say that again?
Awesome. So how much academic endeavor does it take to pull off the ability to do the Mars rover and the moon landing in the same sound studio? No.
That is awesome.
No. All right. So academia and skepticism. I think there's this general sense that academics should be more skeptical. But on a more practical sense, I know Nick is very passionate about teaching skepticism as part And what does that entail? What is it? How do each of you use or see academics in the quest to help people to think in a more proper way and more skeptically? So that's kind of the panel.
Okay, I'll jump on if
Sure.
you don't mind. So what you find, and all my students are graduate students, right? I'm in a graduate program. So as the students do phenomenal research, they do good research, but it's interesting, and I find this is my personal opinion, okay? I have nothing I have no stats for you to actually put this on. I mean, maybe one Harvard study, but my general sense is that people, they do a lot of research, but they accept everything as it's said. And in my field, in Homeland Security, well, the government's doing this, and okay, well, how do you know that's effective? How do you know? No one puts a critical lens to then turn around and say, okay, well, they've said A, B, C, D. How do you know A, B, C, D are correct? And I'll give you the best example I can think about this. I had a student who cited in one of her papers that domestic terrorism had doubled over the last year. I went, doubled. And it was a media source she used. And, in government, I was the chief of counterterrorism operations in the Defense Department. So I'm like, doubled? When someone says that to me, I go looking for bodies. I mean, that's just, my normal thing. So I went and researched her source, her media source. And sure enough, they had doubled from 30 some odd numbers into the 70s. That was correct. Then I went back to look at a University of Maryland database which catalogs all these, and I went through each one and to figure out exactly what was domestic terrorism. Was she correct in the literal sense based off the media? Yes. Now, does it make a difference when I tell you that, 72 cases, 36 of them were fistfights? Okay, I'm kidding you not. One of them was a fight over a parking spot in a Las Vegas hotel.
As most terrorism is.
Yeah, you could say that. And I was actually mentioning this to one of my colleagues in the office, and he says, I was mugged last year at gunpoint. I was robbed. And I didn't know that, Dan. And he said, yeah, and it struck me, the guy who robbed me at gunpoint was charged with domestic terrorism. So, it's just an example, and I use it with my students all the time. If you take one fact and start to pull on the thread, and we all do this, and I do this sometimes, but if you go at that one line and say, oh yeah, this is true, I see whatever, the case may be, terrorism doubles and stuff like that. Well, it turns out that there's a whole lot of detail under that becomes very relevant. Is it true? Domestic terrorism? Yeah, it's literally true. Does it make a difference that half of them are fistfights? In most people's mind, it does. So truth, and however you want to call the word truth, but facts are really what you're after in critical thinking to get past the media blitz, to get past what's just research, and to get into thinking about something, analyzing and challenging it, the core of skepticism.
Sure, and I think that's why it's important that we don't go off of one study. That's one of the things I find that people say, well, I saw a study, like, cool, right? That's great. I'm glad you went and looked for studies, but we don't go off of one study. It's a very iterative process that it changes, and you got verification and blind review and all of that, but still one study doesn't really mean anything in the grand sense of things. If it is true, it will be replicatable. It will withstand scrutiny, like checking, right? The premise was true, but really the base was a little different than what people think.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very common misconception that gets made way too often, especially among people who aren't familiar with graduate level learning, is that people tend to think that science is this big book of knowledge that we have to go check whenever we want to know a thing. And that if you're an old white man with a long white beard and a long white coat, you can take the science down and check it out and learn it, and that, then you'll know stuff about things. And that's not at all how it works. And even really, really big, obvious things that shape our understanding of the world scientifically are still debated and discussed amongst academics. That's the point of academia, is to grapple with the evidence that's there, and like you were just describing quite eloquently, it's not just what did this study find. Okay, yeah, they found that. Were they right? How did they find that? What are they actually saying? Does that make sense in light of this other evidence over here? Maybe everything they said is absolutely true, and now here's some context that completely changes the meaning of it. The first species in our genus, 2.6 million years ago, Homo habilis, really, really important thing for human evolution, right? Might not be real, because there's a huge debate over whether or not it belongs in our genus at all, or whether it's actually a totally different species, or an amalgamation of 4 different species that needs to be split up, or whether the stone tools we have go back way further than those things were around, or maybe they're not. The whole reason I said 2.6 and not 2.4 is because we have stone tools that belong to them before we have fossils that belong to them. There's a lot more detail there than just saying, genus Homo popped up 2.6 million years ago, just like that. It's just not accurate. And so, people who want to get into academia in general, or people who just want to get into skepticism, don't just ask what we know. Ask, how do you know that? Where are you getting that from? How do they know what they know? Like, those are such unbelievably important questions that a lot of people are very used to not asking.
So, just a little side note. Just yesterday, I was with 2 other people here at the con, and we were debating. There was a supply of Coke Zero there in front of us. And they offered me some, and I said, I think it doesn't have sugar or caffeine, and if it doesn't have caffeine, I don't want it. But I'm just going to take a data point here, looking at my colleague on the side, and say, I think it has caffeine.
You don't know anything. I'm just this way.
I have never seen Forrest not be this way.
If anything, this is calming me down.
I'm pretty sure that if you share the bed with somebody, they get no sleep.
Yeah, it's a hard time.
Well, I'm just teasing, and we don't know each other, but actually, I don't know. I love listening to how you think, and it's really interesting.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me.
I'm going to pull on a thread from what you said, which was that if you accept that, it's always been this way, this is true, this is true, this is true, well, how are we going to solve, in my case, it was surface chemistry. How are we going to solve wanting to do chemistry like we do in a flask, but at a surface and understand how to do it? And I was fortunate to work with a guy who really, he just had a real talent at just saying, let's throw that out the window and just think about what we can do instead of what we can't. And I think that is really how you create teams, research teams. And I think that partly it's almost like you make them, the rebel team in Star Wars, where you want to be the team that shows up at the research conference and people are like, oh, it's those people. They don't even believe in that, and they don't do these experiments. They do these experiments, and there's great pride in being one of those rebels. I know it was true for us, and in our case, it was, when you think about the chemistry of what happens in a flask, and the molecules can find each other from any direction. If you want to turn methane into methanol, that's something you can do with a combination of like liquids and gases. But on a surface, how do you attach like oxygens to a surface and oxidize not like the whole material, because then it would be like something that broke apart and wasn't as strong as the original. Like if that's your heart valve, you want to make the layer on the outside something that is really attractive and compatible with the human body, but you want the meat of it to be just as strong and stable as it ever was. And so, they invented ways to look and see how many layers down you were reacting things. And it was all this, and literally, we would have drawings of like helicopters coming in to land with certain molecules, and we would have actually molecules that were very, very reactive that were considered to be hooks that were going to like actually, grab what the helicopter was trying to drop off. And you could actually measure, and actually, just to go a little further, it wasn't just to grab small things, because small things are hard to measure. The helicopter would come in with a supply of these really long, very obvious molecules that would show up in an infrared spectrometer. And so I just love I like it when you can figure out, different ways to think, and then it turned out to be very valuable, and it's led to a lot of really interesting surface chemistry. But I think there's a lot to do also with the dynamics that you create in the group. And we were a lab group originally in the basement of a building, and every time we got a new laboratory, we got a new stereo, and we were across the hall, then we migrated up, had more labs. And because this guy was just really pretty clever, presidential young investigator. And there were some old-fashioned folks, chemistry professors across the hall, and they'd be like, because our boss was just really, had a lot of different people working for him, and we were, men, women, all sorts of different people. And the more old-fashioned folks across the hall were like, that young guy and his bevy of little girls, you know. Actually, they were, but then they ended up, you know, on the bandwagon. And it was nice to be a part of a team where you feel like, you know, we're going to change the world. And so I think it's in coming back to what you said, taking some things that people have taken for granted, and then when you say, let's not do that, you're walking around in a different universe than everybody else, because it's in your universe, that's not true.
The question I'll throw at you, and my experience on that, because I run a whole bunch of teams like that in the Defense Department, but relative to science.
You get them stereos?
But no, actually, you know,
Yeah, see?
they happen to remind them that they're
Now they wouldn't know what to do with
DOD
them.
wouldn't,
They'd have, like,
you know,
iPods and, you know.
their pleasure was not a top priority in the Defense Department, believe it or not. However, someone always pays for this, and if you take critical thinking out just for a second, and then look at the funding and the actual mechanics for how we do research, you know, whether it be in NASA or whether it be, you know, someone is going to sit there and say at some point, okay, well, you know, let's, what's the phrase I remember from a movie, you know, forget about the scientists, the crazy scientists trying to talk to people from Mars, you know. There's a lot of, I won't say dissension in the scientific community, but you get teams that come and look, a lot of it winds up to be absolutely nothing. Now, you don't advance unless you explore and push boundaries. You know, that's a given in research. But there's always a balance that you have to strike. Because I got on a couple of teams I'd run, and you know, people would say, Nick, Paul's out in left field. I know, that's exactly why I hired him. You know, he's the check against every one of us who is, you know, who's trained to think in a certain way. So I understand it, but you know, at least my experience over decades was you're always running into a money barrier on that. So sooner or later, people start saying, okay, stop wasting money. You know, this is the same. Or, you know, truth be told, a lot of it's been done before. You know, a heck of a lot has been done before. We have, you know, generations of scientists who have explored concepts, maybe not with the type of technology that we have, but you find a lot of people, oh, you know, I worked on a project very, very similar to that. I worked on it, you know, 15 years ago. So it's just, it's not as, I don't think it's as easy as clean cut. You're lucky if you get that, I'll put it this way. You're lucky if you have that type of team and you have the type of funding to support it, because most times the bureaucracy in itself tends not to.
Can I tell you a bureaucracy victory?
Yeah, sure.
Which is, this is an ASU team, Arizona State University, which is a pretty rebellious place. Pretty neat, I think. But there's some scientists, actually not just at ASU, but the lead investigator is there, who wanted to go investigate the what do we call it? I'm forgetting its name, but it's called Psyche, and it's basically a metal world. It's like an Earth that started to form and never quite got finished. And they just sent a spacecraft a couple years ago, and it's going to arrive in another few years to see if this is really like basically a metal world with it's just a core. Anyways, this group of people, like in their minds, had a way that they thought that Psyche could have formed, and it was one of two ways. And they, in their mind, it's like a movie that plays, and it's really obvious and intuitive to them. But in terms of applying for the grant, this is where you have to convince people. And for this particular route, you could only submit paper. You could not have electronic links or anything. And this was not that long ago. I mean, they just, you know, they want you to have PowerPoints, you know, all these kinds of things, right? And so they thought, well, you know, we see a little movie.
Can I ask who put out the grant?
What's that? I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know. Anyways, they thought of, you know, we see this movie in our heads, and so they made an old-fashioned flip book. Two of them, one for Mechanism 1 and one for Mechanism 2.
That's cool.
And it was like such a great victory. They got the grant, and the spacecraft was built, launched, and will arrive in a few years. I should know when, but I forget.
I love that.
Sometimes,
Almost
but I know
malicious
there are very
compliance.
few these victories.
Almost malicious compliance. I love that so much. That's so good.
Ooh, I like that, malicious compliance. We should all remember that.
This is coming from someone who calls themselves the Renegade, so...
In all fairness, that's because I'm in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's terrible. And so everywhere, like, I teach evolution. You hear what I'm saying at the beginning. I said I was the least cool person on the stage. You hear all of that. I talk about evolution on the internet. And like that's all Renegade comes from, is that I was so sick of getting in trouble in Oklahoma for talking about the age of the earth, talking about evolution, talking about climate change. So like that's all that is. I don't do those amazing things. I'm not dropping awesome atmospheric chemistry and teaching people about counterterrorism. I argue with creationists. That's my job.
Well, I carry a rabbit, so. I mean, so let's kind of talk about kind of a way in. So I'm presently getting my PhD in Tennessee. You're in Oklahoma.
Yep.
Right, and this may not be this way in Pennsylvania.
In Massachusetts.
In
my case.
Massachusetts,
Yep.
right? But right now, so I have found that there's certain things that we teach in our textbooks because it's what the science says, but then we're kind of instructed, if it's evolutionary or whatever, to say we're not here to change someone's beliefs. This is what the textbook says, and so you'll be tested on it regardless of what you believe. And to me, it's kind of like hedging, almost like we don't believe this, but we have to put it because it's in the book. And I've disagreed with that stance, but it's like general policy because I'm not paying the bills, the students are, and their parents complain. And so what are your thoughts on this? Have you experienced this? What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, girl, get me started. So the
It's a dress, but you know, don't assume.
There was a really cool. It was just a little study. It was published at Penn State several years ago, where they polled high school biology teachers across the U.S. I think they got like a couple thousand people in there, and they were talking about how evolution is taught. And they found that about 60% of the time, they called them the cautious 60%, they would either downplay evolution or they wouldn't teach it at all, because they were afraid of the backlash they would receive. I can tell you in Oklahoma, my high school evolution education consisted of 1 day, well, 1 hour, because it was a 1 hour class, and 80% of that hour was reassuring the students that it's okay to believe in God and understand evolution. And then we were like, this is called a species, and sometimes they're different. That's the end of it. And that was the whole thing. That same publication also found that around 15-ish% of the time, these teachers were outright just promoting intelligent design and saying that evolution isn't real. Only a little less than 30% of the time could you reliably get actual quality evolution education in the classroom. And it's the same thing with, evolution's a big one, it has been for a little while, but it's the same thing with climate change. You get a big stink from, or talking about the biology of sex and gender and why those are different things. These are things that unfortunately become politicized, that now you have this argument of not what the truth is one thing, but also what evidence is out there, whether or not evidence matters, and whether or not this is something that should be taught in a school or something that should be left for the parents at home to teach, even though the parents at home, 9 times out of 10, are not biologists. And so,
well, for that matter, 9 times out of 10, the teachers aren't biologists as well,
that happens
right?
a lot too.
Right.
Yesterday, in this very room, I met some people after the panel I was on who were talking about their child's teacher came up and was talking about what was it? Something about how the water in your body has memories, and if you think bad thoughts, it'll affect the water in your body, and you'll have bad health outcomes, and all these things, and just a bunch of pseudoscience, the secret level garbage, because they heard it on some crappy documentary and they wanted to pass it along.
Well, I was actually there for that, and they were actually telling you that that came up in school. They were, no, that's not true. And the teacher's like, okay.
Yeah.
Right? And then you were able to verify where it came from, and that it was on the documentary, and that they were correct to question that in school.
Yeah.
Right?
And so that's the issue, is you have
That was my son Alex.
I thought I saw you
there you
over
go.
there, but I
Yep.
couldn't see you, and I didn't want to be weird.
For the first day in school a few years ago, and I said, "How was the first day?" And I said,
Right?
Yeah.
"I'm loud."
We're gonna.
And
Here you go, Jamie.
he said, "Thank you." So this was my son Alex, and a few years ago, who's here cosplaying this year. And a few years ago, he came home first day of school. "Hey, how was first day of school?" "Well, my science teacher taught us a lot of hooey today," which I thought was a great choice of language. And I said, skeptical parent, "Well, what do you mean exactly?" "Well, she talked about this whole thing about plants, and if you say nice words to the water, and water the plants, then the plants do better than if you say different words or whatever. So, and he was smart enough, and this was back, he was probably around 11 at the time, and he immediately went to the heart of the matter, and he said, I love this, raise the kid right, evidence raised the kid right. He said, you know, I could imagine some theoretical possibility where this could work in terms of like the tonality of sound or something like that, and you could test that. But the moment you start talking about specific words, I'm out of here. It's impossible.
What language?
And of course, he went right to it. That was exactly right?
Yeah.
That's exactly how you'd look at it. And to make, just to speak briefly to it, we raised holy hell. This was a science teacher, and we were in a public school, and we raised holy hell with the teacher, the principal. We had meetings. We made their lives miserable to the point that they never copped to it because their job is CYA. Up and down the ladder, CYA is their first and last priority, very clear. But I think we scared the hell out of them, so they'll never do it again. And it was not in the curriculum again the following year.
Yeah.
Right. So, but anyway,
Yeah,
there you go.
No, I appreciate the clarification. It really is a matter of like where you are in the country and where you're going to school. We fund schools based on property taxes here, which is insanity. So poor kids are going to have poor education with poor funding and poor teachers and all these things. In Oklahoma, where I'm from, we have emergency certifications because we're hemorrhaging teachers so fast because we keep cutting funding over and over and over and then telling them to do more with less. And so more teachers are getting emergency certification, which is if you have a bachelor's degree in literally anything and can pass the GED test for this subject, you can be a teacher now. We have initiatives to make cops teachers in some places. Like it's just, there's so much there where we're undercutting education again and again and again. And then, surprise, we have these issues where people's religious and political beliefs overshadow their science education.
You can add into that and I mentioned a Harvard study I read a little while ago on this, that 75, let's say it's 75, it's
Sure.
some outrageous number, I forgot it, but 75% of primary and secondary teachers in the United States don't have any training, have received nothing on critical thinking.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of kids, it's a matter of our teachers themselves don't know it, understand it, or teach it.
Mm-hmm.
So when we undercut these things, and then we're going to take your question, what does that do like specifically to critical thinking? Is the responsibility for us to teach teachers to teach critical thinking? Is it that like where do you start? There's so much to do. Where do you start?
Man, I think, teaching, so empowering teachers is the biggest thing because you're putting your kids in a box for 8 hours a day for, most of the year. You're gonna want them to get all the tools that they can possibly get. Public school teachers are real life superheroes. They are amazing things that are able to do an amazing job, which is taking a diverse group of kids from all around this area and you take them in over-medicated, under-medicated, abused, neglected, hungry, tired, all of them from everywhere, and you have to make the same great product, which is a functional human being. And they're able to pull that off, and it's amazing. They need to be better equipped, not only with the training, thank you so much, they need to be better equipped with the training that they need and the funding that they need to make that job feasible for them. Because I can speak again just from Oklahoma, which I can't stress enough, is a terrible place. This is not an exaggeration. High school teachers in Oklahoma make less than a manager at a gas station. That was a real news publication came a little while. We have a famous gas station called Quick Trip, and they pay their managers better than we pay public school teachers. So if you can get a better living by, slinging hot dogs off a roller, then you can literally empowering the next generation of human beings in this country and teaching them how to think and how to be productive and how to save our asses. I don't understand where your priorities are. So yeah, that's the big thing. I think absolutely empowering those teachers, giving them the training that they need and the funding they need is absolutely key. And I'm pretty sure that I'm preaching to the choir on that, but if I can be on record about it, yeah.
Well, I'll just say that I'll disagree with you a little.
Oh yeah.
I agree with providing the teachers the training, but you saw what happened when one of his teachers was empowered, his son's teachers was empowered and went off on a different direction. It it doesn't matter. I mean, empowering them might not be the best thing if you're, if they don't have a curriculum to teach to, and it's a real problem for us. I lived in Japan, this country, sorry, lived in Japan for years, and we called it authoritarianism with a velvet glove, right? Because everything came out of one central place in Japan for educational materials, right? And it went throughout Japan, 115 million people, right? And the school systems taught to that. They even taught personal behavior starting in middle school. Hey, this is what's expected of you in society. This is where you're supposed to behave. This is what you're supposed to do, not supposed to do. And that's a regular part of curriculum. It's far different from us, which is a free-for-all. And if you've never seen the funding mechanisms and how it's done, it's insane.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Pennsylvania, for example, because it's not just property taxes, and in fact, there's 17 different selectors that go into rating an educational system, and the money they get from the federal government is based on their scores there. But so and I just personally disagree with it, but they have I pay about $1,000 a month in school tax. Nothing else but school tax in Pennsylvania. Very high for Pennsylvania. And it's to build monstrous buildings. And the argument being, you're going to have a building for 20 years on this. Where is online education going to be in 20 years, right? Where, if you think to the future, what's the education system going to look like? Doesn't matter, because the federal government pays by, as they call it, butts and chairs. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the funding mechanism can be really screwed up. And is not always reflective of what's happening at an educational level. It's why universities go to uniform testing, because, teacher inflation, it's an issue of money from the federal. Okay, the teachers inflate the grades. The school does better, and they start getting more funding. Yep. The kid shows up for college and can't speak English. Mm. I'm telling you that it's common. Yeah. So it's why still they have standardized testing, for coming into colleges and things like interviews. So I'm just saying it's pretty complex.
No, that's a very, very good point. I am speaking, at a very reductive level of this, and I appreciate that. It is important to point out, like you talk about curriculum, just to speak to what you're saying, there are several states, including mine, where PragerU is official curriculum in the state. So I 100% agree. Having something that's standardized, that's actually taught well, is ideal. I'm wondering on your position then, would you want that critical thinking training to be as a part of the certification to become a teacher?
Absolutely.
Me too. Okay, we're on the same page again.
I think that critical thinking has to be not only on the part of certification for teaching, but put into kids at a young age. Yeah. Well, the reality is Peter Rabbit couldn't talk. I mean, just so that at some point they start to figure things out and look at things critically. And even just things like debate. That Harvard study that I mentioned, 54% of professors said they taught critical thinking, 20-something% said they didn't, and the rest said they didn't know. Interesting. The students' perspective was not that their professors taught critical thinking at all, right? But that they learned critical thinking through the course of things like debates, of ongoing discussion, it was factored into the classwork of how it worked. So for me personally, a little more regimented, a little more, understanding sources, understanding what hypothesis, right? Understanding questioning assertions, those types of things should be baked in at a much earlier age, so our kids start to think like that, and our teachers start to think like that.
100% agree. Sure. Love that.
All right, we're gonna move to questions. But before we do, did you have anything that you wanted to discuss in the last couple of questions? Just ping ponged over two of us, and so.
Okay. When we think about helping teachers, in my experience, you have to realize that they are already treading water, for very little money. And my kid went to public school. He also went to private school. And in both cases, they have the advantage that, I worked at NASA. We have, 2 teachers always on staff that are representing the whole educational curriculum stuff that NASA has. Because it's hard to know. They have so much. It's hard to know where to start, right? And for NASA, it's not it's not the best deal. They have a lot of stuff, but it is hard to figure out, with a teacher that has 10 minutes at the end of the day and has to pick the space unit. What do they do, right? And so these teachers that my son had knew that they could ask something. They had direct access to these people, and nobody wrote to them. And it's because they just don't have time, and in both public and private. And so I think you have to be really sensitive. I agree with, we need to train the teachers in critical thinking. I would actually add problem solving
Oh, yeah.
to that.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
Because I think they're very similar, but also it kind of adds an sort of, why do I need to know about this idea? But just to realize that you have to be really careful about overloading them.
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, they're working 80 hours a week
help
with
is not always help.
5,000 kids. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so we're going to move to questions. Now, we'll ask that you don't touch the mic. This is a magic mic, as they say. And it will move up to you in your height, and they'll adjust the level to make you heard.
It's
so
real gross when
we
you watch it happen.
appreciate, right? We really appreciate thoughtful questions. So let's start there. And it can be for the panel in general. It can be for anybody individually. Wide diversity of panelists' backgrounds here. So what's your name? Where you from? What's your question?
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon. My name is John Montes de Oca, and I am from here, Atlanta. I have a statement question. I love to hear this conversation about teaching and how we should implement a new way of categorizing how the teacher implements their subject matter. But I believe that we are beyond that. We are way past it. I have been a teacher over a decade. I took a break to go to corporate America, and oh boy, that is rotten.
Corporate
Guys,
America is rotten.
yes.
Okay, got it.
Very. What I've been hearing belongs to a type of school that you would think they're teaching. I teach at a Title I school in downtown Atlanta, where at all times we have 200 kids walking the hallways, and there is nothing anybody can do.
Yep.
We're not teaching anymore, guys. We're not teaching. We're after the pandemic. If your school allows cell phones, there's nothing a teacher can do.
So my hearing that we're seeing, because we as citizens, parents, so forth, we're not there every day, that the culture of the school itself is working against the ability for you to teach and to teach critical thinking, because it's just that, like, the culture within those walls is different than what it was than maybe when we were there.
100% that, and also if the child doesn't have any discipline at home, what are the recourses for teachers? Only
Sure.
to put in a case manager that is overloaded, because they are also dealing with the city's case managers. We have one school psychologist for one cluster. That is 15 schools.
Wow.
Now, wait, is this they're not all Title I schools?
No.
Okay.
So
Title I tends to be a extraordinary exception, as you know.
And with gentrification, what you're seeing is schools that are being gentrified, the lower income population is being pushed out. Obviously, they're using somebody else's addresses. Those schools are overpopulated. So my question is to the audience, to you, the panel, when is it that we are going to restructure education? We are working with an 1800 system. What are we doing? What are we expecting? Are we going to
Yes.
keep doing this over and over? Like,
20 years ago would be great. Today was second best as far as restructuring education is concerned. I'm not an education researcher, so I'm not going to sit here and purport to have all the answers. But I agree with you. It's an 1800 system that is meant to, in my opinion, it's really good at teaching kids how to memorize and regurgitate and then forget. It's really good at teaching kids that they are impotent to change their situation and that they are to do what they're told. It's really good at teaching kids to move when the bell rings. It's not really good at teaching kids
To
how
be workers.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a
To be
worker.
factory workers, yeah. It's not very good at teaching kids how to be critical thinkers, how to be independent thinkers, how to be excited and passionate about what they want to do. And you have just absolute armies worth of really passionate, dedicated teachers who walk across the stage with their diploma, so excited to help kids learn who they are and cultivate their own personalities and their own identities and their own ambitions and their own passions and become something special. And for all the reasons you mentioned, get bogged down in paperwork and 50,000 students and having to run a million different meetings and also coach the basketball team and all these other, all while making, barely above minimum wage if they're lucky. So yeah, as far as what are we doing, we're doing a bad job. What we should be doing is investing more into making this education program something more functional, sure, and then also making it worthwhile so that we'll have more incentive for people to become teachers, so we can take the load off the teachers that are already there. We have more people working in the industry. We don't have everything piled onto one poor teacher who's doing so many classes with so many students, and also meeting the students where they are and showing them, hey, if you want to do these cool things in your life, here's how you get there, rather than sit down, shut up, and listen to what I'm telling you because I'm telling you. I'm a big fan of critical theory. The idea that you cannot separate a child's educational life from their political life, their social life, their economic life, their sexual life, their gendered life. Every other part of that child comes into your classroom altogether. They didn't leave all that at the door, just come in with a brain. So, yeah, restructuring education to care more about humans and stop treating school like a business would be really freaking great in my opinion.
We have CEOs, we have CFOs. In our schools, we are creating, we have a business manager now. It's a newly created position. We are a business already, sir.
You got to fund the football team somehow.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
That's it. It just. I'm sorry. I know I've been talking for a long time.
No,
but
we're good, and we appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah.
We've got we've got a line.
We got a line,
stacked
yeah.
now, so we're going to try to address each question. We'll try to get through things without going too terribly long. Some questions obviously may need more complete answers than others, but go ahead with your question.
Well, my question is also going to relate to Title I schools. So I disagree with the claim that was made about property taxes, because I went to a Title I school and the teachers that I had were great. I think I received a very good education in high school. I think I had really good teachers that were probably, in my opinion, they were better than some of the wealthier schools in the county. I didn't go to those schools, but I had friends in them, and I don't think the teachers were as good. So, but then that raises, I think, a important question. What makes a Title I school, the one I went to was Duluth High School, good versus another school like Norcross or Shiloh, where there's a lot of violence and the academic success rate isn't as high? So I think it's a more complicated question. So
Sure, and there's no direct answer to that. Each school, like each person, is individual. And I think when Forrest mentioned the property tax thing, that's specific to his state. Each state kind of does those things differently.
I also am oversimplifying for the sake of brevity, for sure. Yeah.
But also within a system, you can have outliers. You can have a school that's got nothing going for it and be a great school. You can have a school that's got everything going for it and be terrible. I have sat in school classes. I've taken, you get a degree by taking classes. I teach classes, and I can say to a certain degree, you can't teach people. They have to learn. I have seen terrible professors that do an awful job, and the same kids that get straight A's in the other classes get straight A's in their class. And I've seen teachers who were tremendous, who made it exciting and really interactive and were like just beloved and had students fail their classes. And so you can take the worst class, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, grew up in a small woodsy area of Louisiana in a school that historically did very, very poor. He grew up, I don't think he ever met his father. His mother was a substance addict, never held a job, was abusive, and he was brilliant. And he went to a school that had no funding, and he went and taught himself. And so you're going to have some people like that. Then you have others who have wealthy families. I know someone who has a lawyer as a father and just can't pass the class and has every privilege to them. So that these individual data points will vary greatly, but when we look at the entire system, then we see patterns that are a little more consistent that need to be addressed. But yeah, thank you so much.
I 100% agree. Thank you.
All right. What's your question for us?
Hi, I'm Simon. I go to school in Portland, Oregon. Right now I'm writing an honors thesis, and I was wondering what you guys thought about teachers having mandatory philosophy or logic classes. Because I've been reading a lot of Socrates lately for my paper, and they hated him because he was doing what I call delayed politification, where he was subverting the youth, and I think we see that same kind of thing in our education system today. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how to remedy that or alter that.
Now, this is a Greek thing, so let me jump on that.
I saw your eyes light up. I'm like, we're going to start with Nick here.
Yeah, it's the same thing they accused Ozzy Osbourne of, right? Socrates, and which is why he was poisoned or drank poison. I don't look. There's something that I learned, and that's there are only so many hours in the day, and like it or not, you can talk to teachers. I actually started and ran a 501c3, a nonprofit, for almost 20 years, dealing with space science and technology. We put about 40,000 kids through the program. And so I got to talk to a lot of school districts because it was after-school programs and summer camps that we ran. Because you come to the realization that, look, it's 9 to 5, and you have mandates at the federal level and at the state level of subject areas that have to be taught, and you're not going to add in anything else, period. If for you to add in something else, something has to be thrown out. So take your pick, whatever you want to say. Yeah, we're going to add in philosophy, we're going to throw out history. It doesn't matter. The school day is only so long, and you can't cram it. I would tell you that most of what we have to do is not in the schools, but it's in society. Because it doesn't help us if a kid's going home in a Title I school, for example, and I've seen this by the hundreds, right? Kids go home and both parents are working, right? So they're a latchkey kid, and the family is just struggling for money, and it's arguments and this and that, and no one, and they're not educated, so there's not a lot of value. Some generations there certainly is, right? They say, no, most important thing you have to do is get educated. But a lot of families I saw didn't. They're saying, just forget that. Who needs that? So I think the work is more in society that has to be done than really the school system. I mean, in both, but...
Doesn't the school system influence how society is affected, though?
It does. Same thing with government policy, same thing with corporations, same thing with nonprofit organizations, which is, by the way, where you could be the big focus, which is why Title X schools get the most money in hunks and grants, right? Every country creates the type of citizens it needs, theoretically, right? Whether it's factory workers or locksmiths. Now we're going to have a whole big bow wave of people getting technical degrees because working on cars is a hell of a lot more complex than it used to be, and and we don't have people to do that. So you're going to see a lot more movement in that over the course of the next 5 years. So we as society create that. It's our society that we need to address more. I'm sorry, I'll shut up.
No, you're good. And I'll answer the question in a more direct, much more boring sense. I was required to take philosophy classes, master's and PhD. I found great value myself, but when you ask, do I think they should be mandatory? I can say that without seeing the research and knowing what science tells us, I don't know. Sometimes I don't know is a great answer. And because it was beneficial to me doesn't mean that it should be mandatory for everybody.
Use that one with my wife all the time. I don't know.
My wife's usually the one that tells me I don't know, so that works too.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, no, I agree with you what you said broadly, and I think it's really important to remember that that when he talks about society, you're absolutely right to say, yeah, well, schools are where the people in the society are coming from, right? But it's cyclical, and there's no one angle to attack it to improve the whole thing all at the same time. I mentioned a little bit ago critical theory, where all these different parts of a person are coming into the classroom. I can tell you just anecdotally, briefly, I had a god-awful home life. I grew up in poverty. I had a very abusive family. I did not have a good home life, and so in school, I did poorly. And it wasn't until I moved out on my own and started doing education for me that I then took it seriously and excelled. And the only reason I graduated high school is because in my city we had an alternative high school program for the bad kids like me to go to. And I went to the bad kid high school and I graduated because they had the same curriculum, but you didn't have to take anything home. They had block scheduling. It's because I didn't have homework and I wasn't fighting to do my own homework, I all of a sudden started getting straight A's. So like, having alternatives in the school system is great. Having educators that can reach a variety of students is great. Having more counselors and more social workers and more psychologists in schools is great. There's a lot of things you can do at the school level, to your point, that would really benefit the culture of school and would really benefit society as a whole. But at the end of the day, those kids are still going out of that school building where they could, be around drugs, alcohol, crime, whatever else, even at home. And that's a fight that you cannot win just in the classroom alone. So it's very, very, very broad.
Yeah, great question. All right, we're going to try to get we've got 3 more people, we've got 9 minutes, so we're going to try to get all 3 of these in.
Thank you. Some recent school boards have been emboldened by Supreme Court decisions to push the boundaries on what they can call education, and they made claims, they're going to teach the Bible in the classroom, and so they're pushing the boundaries there. And I'm sure they'll do that, or they'll start to do that, and they'll get challenged or whatever. But where do you think they might push the boundaries next in the way of education? What will state educators push next as a agenda item, I guess?
Does anybody else want to? I can't predict the future, but I can see I smell fascism where but it's like when you see people pushing, like for example in Oklahoma is one of the states now it's mandatory that you teach the Bible and things, and in every classroom must teach the Bible according to our genius of a freaking superintendent. And it's the same thing anytime they bring up wokeism or they talk about sex and gender and all these things, and it very, very quickly becomes not teach this curriculum, it's teach my political agenda. And so I don't know what'll be next, but I know where it ends. And it ends with enough people who are skeptical or critical thinkers who are caring about their children's education, who can be as persistent as the people who are very loud and very angry about things they can't define. That's for you to go fight and vote for.
Something that we haven't listed in the list of things that can help a school and help kids want to continue and want to be there and succeed is the arts. And we've got some things, I've just seen some things in Massachusetts where, in Title I schools, putting band in there, and that the kids in the band are ending up having 90% success rate in terms of graduating from high school. And I know for me, music and art, and as much as I was more of a science kind of kid, but having those things are the things that made me, I think that I grew up as a person and I felt spoken to and seen. And so I know we're not going to solve it today, but don't forget about those because they are the very human things that make, I think, kids feel seen, at least at school.
It is very difficult because I agree with you entirely. Arts are so important. And we keep doing, I don't know if it's the same way everywhere, but we keep doing these special programs where it's like, we're going to fund STEM, and STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But also we'll have art in there. So we're gonna do this special program for STEAM. We put STEAM, we put the arts in there, and then reading's really important. So we'll put an R in there too, STREAM, and if you put that together, it spells school. And why isn't that funded? So I agree with you. That's so freaking important, and it's ridiculous that it has to be this special. Hey guys, also,
So
there's this whole other part of your brain that you could
It's interesting that that the number one paying job coming out of college is engineering.
Yeah.
So, and you could sit there and say we should graduate everyone in engineering and, give grants for that and push kids through, into the engineering curriculum. And on the other hand, would you want a world that was all engineers?
God, no.
Right? So, it's just...
All right, next question.
Hi. So I have a question for Cady. Since this is a skepticism panel, I was curious, as an astronaut and person who's been to space, we've all seen the recent stuff about flat earthers or people who have issues with, space. So, in your experience, what is one of the funniest or craziest stories of you as an actual astronaut having to deal with these people who are a little more skeptical?
One that just happened recently, and I don't know maybe people were at my talk yesterday, but I was at an NPR event, National Public Radio, and I was actually going through the crowd. It was one of those nights when people tell stories. It's a story slam kind of night. And I was choosing my book cover that night. And so I was running around with 2 different book covers saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And one of them has, shows the Earth in the background, and I'm in the window of the space station. And this young girl, about 17, said, I just don't understand. I mean, I think it's a nice picture. It's really pretty, but why would you take a picture in a studio when you could have taken a picture out the window of the space station? I was like, well, it is out the window of the space station. and she's like, but it's not, because the Earth is round there, and the Earth is not round.
Oh, come on.
And I'm like, really? Well, and the thing is, I don't know, what I see is, I see a person who's part of the future that, I'm like, we can't lose her. We have to figure out how to help her, right? So I think you have to interact in a way that they can hear. And I just said, I go back to facts. I'm a person. You just heard me, talk about what I do. I looked out the window every day for 159 days, and the world is round. The Earth is round. And I'm just telling you that as my point of view. You can take it as a fact. You can look at pictures that I myself have taken, of which this is one, even though it's of myself. I pushed a button, right? Self-portrait. So that was, and actually I told that story to Alan Alda, and he actually did crack up. I thought that was pretty fun. So that's it.
Excellent. All right, yes.
Hi, my name is Gwen, and I have taught for the last decade at a Title I school. I teach U.S. history here in North Georgia. And
Thank you.
For the love of God, I'm with you on these places going crazy. But I've seen an increase. Obviously, social media has done wonders for helping our kids and explore new things and find new ideas. On the other hand, it's also, someone told me Thomas Edison was Mexican, and
He's not?
sorry, I was
Jumping
as
anaconda.
surprised as you are.
He's not. He was.
Oh, God, no. Thank
I
God.
hear so many different things like that on a regular basis that we've actually done on our classroom site, No Stupid Questions, and I can let them do that without, and then I try to bring in facts, and so they can ask anything anonymously. But social media, positive, negative, I'd just love to hear you guys' opinion on it in education.
I'm a professional YouTuber. I'm biased. You guys go ahead.
So, like in the classroom, we just don't do the social media thing in the classroom. In the classes that I teach, and I teach at a collegiate level, we try to keep the cell phones out. I think
Out or not out?
What's that?
Out or not out?
Out of the classroom.
Yeah.
Okay. It's ubiquitous. There's just nothing that's not a battle we can fight. It's here. So, to me, I'm just let them do their thing, and we just worry about what we're doing. So, this is not directly on that, but this is kind of I had a thing that happened. I think I should have probably mentioned this earlier in the talk, but I think this is kind of another way that you can approach this as a teacher with students. So we were talking about identity, and we were doing, I teach a communication class. We were doing intercultural, and so one of the things in the chapter was talking about people that have different gender identities. So I thought this would be a great way to challenge, because this is a senior level class. So this isn't freshmen. They should be able to think at this level. They should be able to think at a freshman level, but it's clearly you're about to graduate. You should be able to handle this concept. So I said, if you know somebody that is transgender and they may present one way, but their body doesn't biologically align with that, because we're also talking about ethics. When do you think it's ethical for them to mention that to somebody? They start showing interest in somebody, or somebody shows interest in them, right? And so, somebody's like, oh, that's the first thing. I'm like, really? So if somebody says hi, you have to go, oh, wait a second. I look like a girl, but I have a penis. He's like, yeah, hell yeah. I'm like, well, so then we started getting a lot of different, back and forth. It was really nice to let them hey, wait a second, maybe we don't know everything, right? There's a lot of different views in the class. And so we just started talking about, these approaching subjects that you don't know, just jumping in under the gun with your first thought isn't going to get very far. And so after the class, one of the students came up, he said, hey, I really want to talk to you. And we ended up talking for an hour and a half. And he said, I don't believe that that this exists. Like God made us male and female. And I said, okay. I said, let's talk about, because because he asked, what's your opinion? I said, my opinion doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because the truth is the truth. Reality is reality. And what I think of that makes no difference, no bearing. And from a scientific aspect, that's not how we ask questions. That's not how we solve anything. So I asked him a series of questions. I said, let me ask you this. I said, do you believe that your God is all-knowing? He's like, oh, absolutely, 100%. Do you believe your God's all-powerful? Absolutely, 100%. Do you believe your God's all-loving? He loves everybody, 100%. And you believe that God made everybody male or female? It's a binary system. There's no in-between. There's no scale. Everybody's either a male or female. He goes, 100%. I said, are you familiar with people that are born with versions of both a penis and a vagina, or different sexual reproductive organs of various things? He goes, oh, you mean hermaphrodites? And I said, I understand why you're saying that, and this is what you've learned. I said, I will say that if you want to get very far in understanding people, this is an offensive term within that community, and so intersex is a better term, and that's something you can look up, because they're not all the same, and this is not just like a male or female, or you have both this. I said, but you are aware those people exist on Earth? And like, yeah. And I said, okay, so you said God just made everybody male or female, and now you've acknowledged that there are people that don't present or not biologically strictly male or female as your thinking is defined. He goes, well, God knows things we don't. And I said, is he author of confusion? Well, no, God's not the author of confusion. I said, well, I'm confused, and so that would be his fault? I'm like, here's the thing. You've acknowledged a set of facts that are not consistent with one another. I said, I realize you don't have access to all the science. That's one of the problems I have with science at a high level. There's a lot of research papers that you can go get that he can't go get because you're behind the paywall. Right. I said, but you're going off of your Bible. Cool. I challenge you, not for me, but for you, go find the answer to this. Find me the logical, consistent evidence within your book and bring it back and show me. Because if you're right, I will gladly change my position. But this isn't about me. This is about, reality. And if you choose your source, you need to know your source. And so he just he got ready to leave. He said, hey, I just want to say one thing. He goes, I've asked a lot of people about this. You're the first person that was nice to me about it. So sometimes just trying to meet them where they're at, because I don't know his history. I don't know what he's dealt with. I clearly know some of the things he's been taught. And so arguing with him, I didn't, it's not my style anyways, and I didn't feel like it was going to get anywhere. But just the fact that I was like, hey, if your book's right, it'll be there. Now go find it. Right? So that was just another tool in the work belt there. So we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming. Hey, let's give our guests a hand and sharing their academic knowledge with us.
Thanks very much.
You guys enjoy your con.
And I'm going to be selling books. I've got them on my website, but also I'll just be over at the Skeptics table out there near the escalator, and happy to see folks. Thanks.
Great.
And anybody else have any shameless plugs?
Oh, yeah. If you're into TTRPG stuff, check out Roll for Initiative. A bunch of my friends and I got together to play Tales of the Valiant to raise money for Doctors Without Borders. As of this morning, we've raised over $19,000 so far. So if you want to support people in crisis zones all around the world, you can do so. Just make sure you do it using my fundraising links. That way I can keep track of it and get better sponsors, do more stuff later. Thank you. Bye!
Wait a second. No. Thank you. I have friends who work for Doctors Without Borders.
Me too. They're great.
Right? And I love that. Thank you so much for doing that. Kurt, anything?
No, we're good.
Nick?
No, ma'am.
Nope. Okay, bye. Thanks.
See you later.